In this video, we revisit the palaces and mansions of history's fallen dictators and see who lives in them now. The Palace of the Parliament, Bucharest, Romania. The colossus that Nicolae Ceausescu ordered built in the 1980s as the seat of his absolute power, demolishing a fifth of the historic city and a swathe of churches and homes to clear the ground, conscripting tens of thousands of workers and bankrupting a starving nation to raise the heaviest building on earth. Ceausescu executed by firing squad on Christmas Day 1989, before the palace was ever finished, never living in the monument to himself. The building completed by the democracy that overthrew him and now housing the Romanian parliament and a museum of contemporary art. Tour groups walking marble halls a dictator never saw. The largest administrative building in the world inherited by the people he built it to crush. The Spring Palace, Bucharest, Romania. The private residence where Ceausescu and his wife Elena actually lived. 80 rooms of gold bathroom fittings, silk wallpaper, an indoor pool, and a private cinema, all hidden behind a modest facade, while the country queued for bread and rationed heat. Opened to the public as a museum in 2016, visitors filing through the peacock garden and the gold-tapped bathrooms of a couple who claim to be servants of the workers, the secret luxury of the most austere-seeming regime in the Eastern Bloc, now a ticketed attraction, the dictator's bathtub photographed by the descendants of the people who froze. Villa Torlonia, Rome, Italy. The grand estate that Benito Mussolini rented from an aristocratic family for the symbolic sum of 1 lira a year and used as his residence for nearly 2 decades, building a bunker beneath it as the war turned against him. After his fall and execution in 1945, the villa was occupied by Allied forces, then left to decay for decades before the city of Rome restored it. Now a public museum and park, the bunker open to visitors, families picnicking on lawns where the fascist dictator once walked. The home of the man who invented fascism reduced to a pleasant afternoon in a city park. The Berghof, Obersalzberg, Bavaria, Germany. The mountain retreat where Adolf Hitler spent more time than almost anywhere else, entertaining foreign leaders on a terrace with a panoramic view of the Alps, the spiritual heart of the Nazi regime. Bombed by the Royal Air Force in the closing weeks of the war and then deliberately demolished by the Bavarian government in 1952 to prevent it becoming a shrine. The site left as overgrown rubble in the forest, a few retaining walls swallowed by moss, no marker pointing the way. Nearby, the Eagle's Nest survives as a mountaintop restaurant where tourists eat lunch where Hitler once stood. The most photographed lair of the 20th century erased so thoroughly that hikers walk past its foundations without knowing they are there. Gibatolite, Democratic Republic of the Congo. The remote jungle town that Mobutu Sese Seko transformed into the Versailles of the jungle, building 3 palaces with chandeliers, marble imported from Italy, a nuclear bunker, and an airport runway long enough to land a chartered Concorde so he could shop in Paris while his nation collapsed into poverty. Mobutu overthrown and dying in exile in 1997, the palaces looted and shelled during the wars that followed. Now they stand as vast ruins in the rainforest. Peacocks gone wild in the grounds. Locals harvesting fruit among the collapsed colonnades. The jungle Versailles, given back to the jungle, its marble halls open to the rain. Barengo Palace, Central African Republic. The palace that Jean Bedel Bokassa built outside the capital, the self-declared emperor who crowned himself in a ceremony modeled on Napoleon's that consumed a quarter of the impoverished country's annual budget on a diamond-encrusted throne shaped like an eagle. Overthrown in 1979, the palace abandoned and stripped, the jungle creeping through its halls for decades. in recent years reportedly used as a base by Russian mercenaries operating in the country, soldiers occupying the ruins of an emperor who modeled himself on a French one. The throne room of a man who wanted to be Napoleon turned into a barracks for foreign guns. The Pyramid of Tirana, Albania. The angular concrete pyramid built in 1988 as a museum glorifying the communist dictator Enver Hoxha, who sealed Albania off from the world and dotted it with hundreds of thousands of bunkers against an invasion that never came. After the regime fell, the pyramid became a derelict eyesore, a crumbling slide for local teenagers who climbed its sloping walls. Renovated and reopened in 2023 as a technology and youth center, children now learning to code inside the monument built to worship the man who kept their grandparents in the dark. The shrine to a paranoid tyrant repurposed into a place that teaches the next generation to connect to the world he forbade. Bab al-Azizia, Tripoli, Libya. The fortified compound from which Muammar Gaddafi ruled Libya for over 4 decades, a sprawling complex of barracks and tunnels, and the famous bombed house he kept as a monument to a previous American airstrike. Stormed by rebels in 2011 as his regime collapsed, Gaddafi captured and killed weeks later, the compound looted and largely demolished by the people he had ruled. The site left as a wasteland of rubble, used for a time as an informal dump and market. Plans for a public park repeatedly proposed in the chaos that followed. The seat of one of the longest dictatorships in the Arab world, flattened into broken concrete by the citizens who finally walked through its gates. The presidential palace, Damascus, Syria. The mountaintop fortress overlooking the capital. The vast modern palace of the Assad family, who ruled Syria with an iron grip for over half a century through a war that killed hundreds of thousands. When the regime collapsed in December 2024 and Bashar al-Assad fled the country, crowds poured through the gates of the family's palaces and residences, walking the marble corridors, photographing the luxury cars and designer wardrobes, carrying off furniture from rooms ordinary Syrians had never been allowed to see. The palaces of the family that bombed its own cities thrown open in a single day, the most feared address in Syria, suddenly full of citizens taking selfies in the dictator's own halls. Mezahiria, near Kyiv, Ukraine. The lavish estate of Viktor Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president who fled to Russia during the 2014 revolution, leaving behind a compound of staggering excess, a private zoo, a galleon-shaped floating restaurant, a golf course, and a golden toilet that became the symbol of his corruption. Seized by the state and open to the public, the grounds now a park and the mansion a museum of corruption where Ukrainians wander through the gold-leafed rooms of the man they overthrew. The hidden palace of a president who claimed a modest salary turned into living evidence of everything he stole. El Valle de los Caídos and the legacy of Francisco Franco, Spain. The Spanish dictator who ruled for nearly 4 decades and was buried after his death in 1975 in a colossal basilica carved into a mountain by the forced labor of political prisoners, the Valley of the Fallen, where he lay enshrined for over 40 years. In 2019, the Spanish government exhumed his remains and moved them to an ordinary family plot, removing him from the monument his victims had built. His summer residence, the Paso de Meras, seized by his family for generations, and finally returned to the Spanish state by court order in 2020. The dictator who tried to make his tomb permanent, dug up and relocated, his stolen estates handed back to the public decades after his death. The House of Flowers, Belgrade, Serbia. The mausoleum where Josip Broz Tito, the strongman who held Yugoslavia together for 35 years, was laid to rest in 1980 in a sunlit garden house among his beloved plants. Unlike most of his peers, Tito's grave became a place of nostalgic pilgrimage rather than rage, visited each year by those who remember the country that fell apart violently after he died. His island retreat on Brigiuni, where he hosted world leaders and kept a private zoo of gifted exotic animals, now a national park and resort. The dictator remembered with something closer to affection, his tomb tended, and his islands opened as a vacation destination by the descendants of the federation he ruled. The National Palace, Port-au-Prince, Haiti, the gleaming white presidential palace that was home to the brutal Duvalier dynasty, Francois Papa Doc and his son Jean-Claude Baby Doc, who looted Haiti and terrorized it through their Tonton Macoute death squads for nearly 30 years, until Baby Doc fled into exile in 1986. The palace surviving the dictatorship only to be destroyed by the catastrophic earthquake of 2010, its white domes pancaking into rubble. Demolished in 2012, the site left as an empty lawn for over a decade, the seat of Haitian power a vacant field in a capital still waiting for it to be rebuilt. The palace of the dictators outlasting them by a generation, then collapsing in 30 seconds when the ground itself gave way. The palaces of Saddam Hussein, Iraq. The dozens of opulent palaces Saddam Hussein built across Iraq during sanctions that starved his people, gilded complexes with his initials carved into the masonry and artificial lakes stocked for his private use, including one raised beside the ancient ruins of Babylon, so he could literally build himself above the kings of antiquity. After the 2003 invasion, the palaces became American military bases, the largest converted into Camp Victory, soldiers sleeping under chandeliers in the throne rooms of the man they had toppled. Many since returned to the Iraqi state, some turned into museums, one in Basra now displaying the artifacts Saddam's wars endangered, the monuments to a tyrant's ego, occupied first by foreign armies and then by the nation he bled to build them, Malacañang and the Marcos Estates, the Philippines. The presidential palace from which Ferdinand Marcos and his wife Imelda ruled the Philippines through martial law, looting billions while Imelda assembled the 3,000 pairs of shoes that became the emblem of the regime's excess, the couple fleeing to exile in Hawaii in 1986 as the People Power Revolution swept them out. The shoes preserved in a museum, the palace still serving as the seat of government, and in a turn almost no other entry on this list can match, the family returned. The dictator's son elected president of the Philippines in 2022, the Marcos name back in the very palace the country once drove it from, the only fallen dynasty here to have walked back through its own front door. Casa de Caoba, San Cristobal, Dominican Republic. The Mahogany House, the country estate of Rafael Trujillo, El Jefe, who ruled the Dominican Republic for 31 years, renamed the capital after himself, and ran the nation as a personal fiefdom until he was ambushed and assassinated on a coastal highway in 1961. The mansion, paneled throughout in the dark mahogany that gave it its name, abandoned by the fleeing family and left to decay on its hilltop, the capital quickly renamed Santo Domingo to erase him. The house still standing, peeling and half empty, occasionally open to curious visitors who walk the rotting floors of a tyrant whose name the country spent decades scrubbing from its maps. The estates of Augusto Pinochet, Chile. The general who seized power on September 11, 1973, in the coup that sent Air Force jets to bomb the La Moneda presidential palace, where President Allende died, then ruled Chile for 17 years through disappearances and torture. La Moneda itself, repaired and restored, still the working seat of the Chilean president today. Pinochet living out his power in comfortable residences in Santiago's wealthy foothills, arrested in London in 1998 on a foreign warrant, held under house arrest, then released and dying in 2006 with hundreds of charges and secret foreign bank accounts still unresolved, never convicted of anything. The palace he bombed restored to democracy, the man who bombed it dying a free citizen in a comfortable home. The properties of Manuel Noriega, Panama, the military strongman and former American intelligence asset who ran Panama as a center of drug trafficking until the United States invaded in 1989 to capture him, Noriega taking refuge in the Vatican's embassy before surrendering and spending the rest of his life in prisons in 3 countries. His luxury properties seized by the Panamanian state, including a beach house and mountain retreats stuffed with the trappings of a narco fortune. Noriega dying in 2017, the homes of the dictator the United States once paid and then invaded passing into the hands of the republic he plundered. The residence in Dedinje, Belgrade, Serbia, the comfortable villa in the elite quarter of the Serbian capital, where Slobodan Milosevic, the architect of the Balkan Wars of the 1990s, lived and ruled until the bulldozer revolution of October 2000 swept him from power. Extradited to The Hague to face charges of genocide and crimes against humanity, dying in his cell in 2006 before any verdict was reached. The leafy Dedinje district remaining the address of the Serbian establishment, the man who set a region on fire ending in a courtroom cell far from the villa where he gave the orders. Aso Rock and the Abacha loot, Abuja, Nigeria. The fortress-like presidential complex beneath a great granite outcrop from which General Sani Abacha ruled Nigeria in the 1990s, while siphoning an estimated several $billion into foreign bank accounts, one of the largest thefts by a head of state in African history. Abacha dying suddenly in office in 1998, the looted fortune chased across the banks of the world ever since, hundreds of millions repatriated to Nigeria decades after his death and still being returned. Aso Rock continuing as the seat of every Nigerian government that has followed. The villa unchanged, the money still trickling home long after the man who stole it was gone. The estates of Alfredo Stroessner, Paraguay. The general of German descent who ruled Paraguay for 35 years, one of the longest dictatorships in South American history, turning the country into a haven for fugitive Nazis and a machine of repression until his own officers overthrew him in 1989. Fleeing to exile in Brazil, where he died in 2006 having never returned, his statues toppled and his name stripped from the city he had renamed for himself. The properties of his era absorbed by the state, the strong man who seemed permanent ending as an old man in a foreign suburb, his 3.5 decades of power dissolving the moment the army he trusted turned on him. The Jubilee Palace, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The palace seized by Mengistu Haile Mariam, the colonel whose Marxist Derg regime overthrew Emperor Haile Selassie and unleashed the Red Terror that killed hundreds of thousands, ruling from the grand residences of the very monarchy he had destroyed. Mengistu fleeing to Zimbabwe in 1991 as rebels closed on the capital, convicted of genocide in absentia and living in comfortable exile to this day. The imperial palaces passing to the new Ethiopian state, parts of the grounds and the old menagerie eventually opened to the public. The man who toppled an emperor to live in his palace, ending his days a protected guest in a foreign country. The throne he seized inherited by yet another government. Tuol Sleng and the grave of Pol Pot, Cambodia. Not a palace of luxury, but the architecture of a regime that abolished luxury itself. The former school in Phnom Penh that Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge turned into the S-21 torture prison, where thousands were processed for execution as the regime emptied the cities and killed perhaps 2 million people. The prison, now the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum, its cells and photographs preserved as evidence, and far away near the Thai border, the cremation site where Pol Pot's body was burned on a pile of tires and rubbish in 1998, marked today only by a rusting corrugated roof and a simple sign. The leader who promised a pure agrarian utopia ending beneath a sheet of scrap metal, his prison better maintained than his grave. The Cendana residence, Jakarta, Indonesia. The surprisingly modest street house where Suharto lived throughout the 3 decades he ruled Indonesia, amassing one of the largest fortunes ever attributed to a head of state, while presiding from an ordinary middle-class address on Jalan Cendana, a deliberate image of restraint over a regime accused of staggering corruption. Forced from power in 1998 amid economic collapse and mass protest, dying in 2008 with the charges against him never resolved. The family retaining the house, the unremarkable home of one of the wealthiest dictators in modern history, still standing on its quiet street. The palace that wasn't a palace, the looted billions hidden behind a facade of ordinariness. Heliopolis Palace, Cairo, Egypt. The opulent former hotel turned presidential palace used by Hosni Mubarak, who ruled Egypt for 30 years until the Arab Spring filled Tahrir Square and forced his resignation in 2011. The strongman tried and imprisoned before his eventual release. The palace continuing as a seat of the Egyptian presidency. Part of it later opened as a museum displaying the gifts and history of the nation's rulers. The corridors of one toppled by a revolution still serving the office he held, the building that outlasted him welcoming visitors where he once received the world. The lakeside villa of Ne Win, Yangon, Myanmar. The home on Inya Lake, where the reclusive general who ruled Burma for a quarter century and drove one of Asia's richest nations into ruin, spent his final years, falling from power and dying under house arrest in 2002, as his own family was accused of plotting against the junta that succeeded him. The villa standing on the shore of the lake in the heart of the city, the dictator who isolated an entire country ending his life confined to a single house on its waterfront. The gold statue of Saparmurat Niyazov, Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. Not a single mansion but a cult. The dictator who renamed the months of the year after himself and his mother, wrote a holy book all citizens were forced to study, and erected a golden statue of himself that rotated to always face the sun. After his death in 2006, his successor eventually moved the rotating statue from the city center to the outskirts, downgrading the monument without quite daring to melt it down. The golden god of Turkmenistan still standing, still turning, relocated rather than removed, because even the regime that followed him was not sure it was safe to take him down.